Hi everyone, it's William. This is the 1921 Grand Duke Dmitri Diary series. If you're coming for the first time, we're going through the diaries entry by entry of Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich of Russia. And this is actually the last part of the long but not too long summary diary issue of 28th February 1921. Olga is back with us, so I'll just briefly hold up his photograph again. See if I can angle it so you don't have the glare. And I'm sure I've shown his photograph more than I've even shown any of Dmitri's, because I have such a nice one. A nice photo of Olga, that is. But let's see, Dmitri himself, I'm afraid, is feeling quite depressed, and it's never hard to tell with him. It's always pretty apparent. So what did we talk about in the last section of this diary entry? Well, that he was actually entertaining the notion that he would like to settle down in Copenhagen, that he would like to get a position as an instructor in the Danish army, and he would feel like he was actually doing something, and he would be with Marie Louise. Even if they didn't get married right away, he would be near her. So it seemed like there were a lot of obstacles in the way of doing that. But I guess, you know, that Olga, good old Olga, had told him that it wasn't out of the question, that it might be arranged. One of the biggest obstacles that Dmitri saw was not whether or not the Danish royal family and the Danish government would be pleased with the idea, but how Maria would react to it, how his sister would react to it. And the two of them always had this sort of endearing, but also a little bit of annoying habit of each of them assuming that the other couldn't live without him or her, that the other was a poor thing whose life wasn't going well. And they both thought that about each other, and maybe they were both right. But I think that maybe sometimes they overdid it. I think there were times when, you know, Dmitri was doing well, when Maria was convinced that he was wasting away without her, and probably vice versa. But all right, let's dive in. It goes without saying that very little news from Russia reaches Copenhagen. Olga is full of optimistic rumors purporting that there are uprisings going on in Moscow and Petrograd, and that large anti-Bolshevik protests are in the works and are supposedly quite serious in nature. But all these rumors make very little impression on me. We have heard these things so often, and so often they have come to nothing. But Olga has access to many sources of information because he serves at headquarters and is in the intelligence section, meaning that he has contact with counterintelligence agents. He also talks about the state of affairs in Copenhagen, but that only interests me to the extent that it touches upon the world revolutionary movement. Olga, who has always been surprisingly optimistic, also takes a rosy view of that situation. He tells me that in Denmark this year, there has been, I was wool gathering there. Let me go back. Olga, who has always been surprisingly optimistic, also takes a rosy view of that situation. He tells me that in Denmark this year, there has been great improvement with respect to the workers' organizations, and that the situation has changed greatly for the better. Of course, it's completely impossible for me to verify the rumors or his assertions, and in fact, I have little interest in doing so. But I really love Olga. He's remarkably kind, good-natured, and cheerful. Now I'll start describing how I spent each day, and it will be clearly evident that I had no chance of being bored. Okay, so we will be going then to the daily diary entries, beginning with the 15th of February and going through to the 27th, and then we'll have another long diary entry. And poor Olga is about to start having domestic problems. So we haven't quite heard the last of him yet, even though Dmitri will soon be leaving Copenhagen, he figures in the short diary entries. And something occurred to me today, which is Dmitri never really provides physical descriptions of anyone. He hasn't told us anything about Marie-Louise except for the fact that she's pretty and nice, but no physical description at all. And that's true equally of the men and the women in his life, unless the exception being that if they had some kind of noteworthy feature that he considered usually negative, they were obese, or they dressed in a garish way, or they had a big nose, or whatever, then he would notice that. But when people are just generally acceptable, they dress nicely, they have a good enough figure, and then he doesn't say anything. So it's really only through photographs that I've come to this conclusion that he liked sort of petite brunettes, that was kind of his type, because he never tells us. And it's odd, really, going back to when he was 14, and perhaps you recall in some of those diary entries how he talked on, I think, 2 or 3, about how a person had amazing eyes, and that he couldn't get out of his head, and he was quite taken by people's eyes. But as an adult, he never talks about anybody's eyes. So, go figure. Yeah, so we have shifted focus a little bit at the end of this diary entry, and I think he was a little sheepish. In the previous diary entry, he talks about how he had gone into detail and written too much about his feelings and his personal state of mind. But I don't think it was an exceptionally long section on that, and I'm so grateful that he does that in these long diary entries. But it's true that he usually starts off by talking about the political situation and the world situation and going into detail about that, and then at the end he'll say, and now I'm going to say a few words about myself. But this time the opposite, because the whole thing with Marie-Louise and what fate had in store for him were so much on his mind. So here we have again the man who was eager to start his own little intelligence gathering group in Paris. And it struck me as odd all along that he just sort of suddenly decided to walk away from that, which doesn't mean that he disbanded it, but something was clearly going on. He told us that he hadn't wanted to come to Copenhagen, that the Marlings were kind of pressuring him, but he really didn't want to go, partly because of his complex relationship with Lucia. But it turns out she's been on her best behavior during this trip. And yeah, he didn't want to go, but all of a sudden he went. And so I wish I knew exactly what had happened in Paris that he hasn't told us about. And maybe it wasn't one thing. Maybe it was just that he was getting more and more depressed and having a harder and harder time dealing with the emigre situation, with them squabbling and not seeing things from his perspective, and yeah, whatever. He decided the time was right to go. So we'll see, I guess, if he's going to go back and dive into his work with his intelligence bureau. But yeah, I'm getting largely indifference here. He's cynical about what Olga is telling him, and not surprisingly, because he's absolutely right when he says that he's gotten excited about things, or that other people have gotten excited about things so many times in the past and they never work out. And that's true. And you see that going back to 1917 in his diaries. So it's just, he can't anymore get excited about these things. And of course he's right. It's not going to come to anything. But he's hedging his bets a little bit, because so this is new information to me. It makes me all the more curious about Olga, that he was not only at headquarters on the staff, I think, in Copenhagen, but that he also was in the intelligence section and had contact, as Dmitri puts it, with counterintelligence agents, so maybe people going and coming from Russia. So that's interesting. My God, that was precisely the sort of thing that Dmitri wanted access to for his information bureau. But now it's kind of just a shoulder shrug, right? I don't really care, is kind of what he's saying. He wants to know about, as he puts it, the world revolutionary movement. Well, everybody did back then. Everybody wanted to know what the Bolsheviks were up to. And this idea of the international Russian nationalism would only come into the picture later with Stalin and with the Second World War. Right now, everybody is convinced in 1921 that the Bolsheviks are going to try to spread communism and take over the world. And that fear would remain in Russian emigre circles. And, it would send some of the Russian emigres, unfortunately, into the arms of the Nazis. That just really visceral fear. And earlier on, in 1920, Dmitri and Maria had thought about going to South America. One of them wanted to go to Brazil, and one of them wanted to go somewhere else. But they talked about it purely out of this fear that the world revolutionary movement was going to succeed. And so that was not a small matter to them. And of course Dmitri was worried about it. And of course he was a rational man, though. He wasn't going to go running off to Brazil. That was a temporary thing. And he wasn't going to jump on the whole fascist bandwagon in later years. He saw through that, thank God. So, aside from that, he's really not interested in what Olga has to say. And I just think that's such a change in tone. He was already depressed in Paris, but he was into the whole information bureau thing. So I wonder what happened specifically with that. Okay, but I love Olga, he says. Well, he's never said that about Marie-Louise. Of course, he doesn't mean that he's in love with Olga, obviously, but he's willing to use the word love the way any of us would with a close friend who has our back, so to speak, and who we can share things with that we wouldn't with other people, although I'm not sure to what extent he does that with Olga. But Olga knows that he's interested in returning to Copenhagen and settling down there, and I don't think many other people in his life knew that. And yeah, I'm quite willing to take Dmitri's word for it that Olga was a kind, good-natured, optimistic, cheerful man, because that's the way he treats Dmitri. So maybe his wife and some of the women in his life had complaints that I don't know about, but overall I think he was a good egg. And yeah, who knows? I still need to get his memoir so I can maybe figure out why he went off and joined the French Foreign Legion. But it surely could have been because of complicated relationships. All right, so you'll want to come back for, I've read a little bit ahead, and I can tell you at the very least that the next two diary entries of the 15th and 16th of February will have a crisis with the Dowager Empress, and we'll have Dmitri and Ksenia coming together a little bit. They really haven't seen much of each other, and they liked each other. They always liked each other from the time Dmitri was a kid. But this whole thing about the Sokolov papers and documents and investigation had kind of come between them a little bit. But anyway, yes, come back for those. And hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye.